Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And after the best regular season we've had here in OOTP 25 with Oakland, a 108-54 record, the best record in baseball, 24 games up on the Angels to win the American League West. We will try to do something that we haven't done yet in this playthrough, although we've got 4 titles overall, and we have won 3 of the last 5 World Series championships. We have not been able to repeat as world champions yet, and the hope is that over the next month or so of fictional baseball action, we will be able to guide this team to a title. And just 2 quick notes before we get going with the episode. Note number 1, it's been a few days since we've put out an episode. And I wanted to get this episode out to our loyal viewers, but this will likely be a relatively short episode. So I know some of you, when we get to playoff time, who have watched us over the years, like to try to figure out how we did in the playoffs by the length of the episode. And if it's a 30 or 40-minute episode, it probably means that we didn't go all that far in the playoffs. If it's an hour and 20 minutes, that generally will mean that we went on a pretty long run and may have won a World Series championship. But I don't have a ton of time to play the game right now, so although I want to get an episode out there, I'll let you know up front that this is going to be a short one. Doesn't mean that we won't be eliminated in the first round, and that'll be the reason for the short episode. But it's also extremely likely that even if we were to win the World Series this season, when all is said and done, it won't all be crammed into this episode, because I just don't think I have time to guide this team all the way through the playoffs before I have other things to do away from OOTP this evening. And the second note, just a quick comment. Those of you who have followed the channel over the years know that I am a fan of New York sports teams, and my football team is the New York Jets. We have a new coach, Aaron Glenn, and some of you are probably wondering what I'm thinking about that, and I'm pretty excited about it. There are a fair amount of Jets fans who, in my opinion, have the somewhat lazy take that, oh, we're hiring another first-time coach from the defensive side of the football. There's no way this can possibly work. And they talk about, most recently, Robert Saleh and Todd Bowles, but you can also put the likes of Al Groh and Herm Edwards and Eric Mangini and Rex Ryan into that same description if you'd like to. But I do think that's a little bit of a lazy way to think about things. I would say that Robert Saleh, as a defensive coordinator, has certainly had more success and accomplished more than Aaron Glenn has in his coaching career thus far. That being said, Robert Saleh was not a good head coach at the NFL level. Hopefully he'll get the opportunity to become one down the line and maybe learn from some of the things that he'd like to change based on his time in New York. But when I look at Aaron Glenn, I see a former Jet who was an outstanding cornerback in the NFL for about a decade and a half, most of that time with the Jets, multiple Pro Bowler and one of the best cornerbacks in Jets history. Probably, as I think back over the Jets that I've watched, certainly Darrelle Revis, the best cornerback, but Aaron Glenn, arguably second. James Hasty also had some excellent years at a cornerback for the Jets. And more recently, obviously, Sauce Gardner's had some outstanding seasons, but would like a bounce-back year from this 2024 season from Gardner and several more seasons to put him in the same conversation as some of those others. But more importantly than being a former Jet, it seems like Glenn is a potentially strong leader, culture builder, and disciplinarian. And I think with just about any team, but particularly this Jets team, which committed tons of stupid and selfish penalties in recent seasons, those traits are pretty important to become an effective head coach. And I think there's certainly a chance. No guarantees by any stretch of the imagination, but back to first-time defensive coaches just being doomed to failure in that argument. Well, the last time the Jets brought on an experienced coach on the offensive side of the ball as a hire, that was Adam Gase, and that did not work out that well. And I can think of some pretty good first-time defensive coaches with limited experience as a defensive coordinator. Bill Parcells had a lot of success after 2+ years as a defensive coordinator with the Giants. Mike Tomlin, I think, only had 1 year as a defensive coordinator with the Vikings, and I think they might have had the worst pass defense in football that year. And he still got hired on and has had a excellent run for almost 2 decades as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So anytime you bring on a new head coach, it's a roll of the dice, and the odds are probably not stacked in your favor. But I'm looking for someone to be the CEO of the team, to instill discipline and a standard and build a culture and have a vision that he leads the team towards as a head coach. And I think Aaron Glenn is going to depend on his ability and the Jets' ability and his coaching staff's ability to find, identify, and develop in the coming years a legitimate NFL quarterback. And if he and the Jets are unable to do that, then he's probably not going to have an incredible head coaching career. But if they're able to find a quarterback, I think he's got a lot of other traits that make me confident this could work out well. And with that, we will turn our attention to the playoffs. Looking at the playoff tree, the Tigers join us with a first-round bye in the American League, the Cardinals and the Rockies with the byes in the National League, and we will be facing either our division rival Angels or the Chicago White Sox in the best-of-5 divisional series coming up in a few days. But before we find out who we're going to be facing off against in the ALDS, talk a little bit about what our playoff roster will look like. And as we talked about in the last episode, we had the number 1 offense in the American League this year, as well as the number 1 pitching staff. So we've got some tough decisions to make. Pitching-wise, as we always do, going to go with 12 pitchers rather than 13 on the postseason roster to take advantage of those off days that we have and the fact that we only need 4 starters for our rotation. So probably no surprise to those who have followed us over the course of the season that Dave Baumler, who had the roughest year out of any of our starters, is going to be moving to the bullpen for the postseason. And he was close to not making the roster for the postseason after a disappointing 6-9 year with a 4.88 ERA. But he was still a win above replacement level. So this move may surprise some of you, but the pitcher who's going to make, or not going to make more accurately, our postseason roster, as the last man left off, is our longtime closer, Chuck Huntley, who was replaced as closer this year when we made the trade for Juan Padilla, who's been suffering from a sore elbow recently but should be back in 3 days. But Huntley is a 26-year-old who has just lost a lot over the last year plus. Back in February of 2040, just a year and a half ago, he was still touching 100 miles on the radar gun, and he was up to 101 only a month or two before that. But he's inexplicably, at the age of 25 to 26, lost almost 10 miles an hour off of his fastball from the peak to the low end of his peak now. And the lefty had a really tough year for us this year with a 5.40 ERA over 55 innings pitched, lost 8 games, 13 meltdowns, allowed a dozen home runs, and he was almost a win below replacement level. And given that we do have a fair amount of other good lefties in our bullpen, at least for the time being, our former closer, Chuck Huntley, does not make the playoff roster. And that opens up an extra spot for a position player for us. But we actually opened up 2 extra spots because our backup catcher throughout the season, Hidetaka Ogata, who hit a brutal 147 in just 34 at-bats, despite his outstanding defense, was below replacement level with a sickly 2 WRC plus for the year. And we are leaving Mr. Ogata off of the playoff roster because Mendoza will be our starter, presumably in every game, unless somehow he gets worn out. But with the off days, that shouldn't happen. But if we need a backup, we've got Jonah Richards, who will likely be our starting catcher next year. And given that Ogata very unlikely to play with both Mendoza and Richards on the roster, and he didn't bring anything to the table with the bat, we decided to leave him off of the playoff roster, at least for the time being. And that lets us have 2 guys on the roster who might not otherwise be. One is Chris Lance, the left-hander we picked up in a trade with the Braves a little less than a year ago. Had a really nice season for us in AAA. Brought him up in September, and he didn't get a lot of opportunity to play, but he did hit .409 with a homer and 5 ribbies in 22 at-bats, put up OPS plus and WRC plus of 200 plus, and gives us a pretty interesting left-handed bat, particularly against right-handed pitching, to use as a potential pinch hitter. He can also play several positions defensively, although he's not particularly effective. And then Phil Swenson, another guy who spent most of the year in the minors and had a good solid year for us in AAA, also makes the postseason roster. A right-handed hitter, so gives us another potential pinch hitter off the bench. A much higher quality and versatile defensive player with really good speed. And he was a respectable offensive player for us this year. So with the dip down to just 12 pitchers for the playoffs and Ogata also being moved off of the roster, both Phil Swenson and Chris Lance get the opportunity to be on the postseason roster for our Oakland Athletics. And as we get ready for our first playoff series, in the first round in the wild card series, the Giants took out the Nationals 2-1. They will face off against the Cardinals. The Phillies took out the Mets 2-0, and they'll face off against the Rockies. The Blue Jays took out the Guardians in 3, and they will face off against the Tigers. And we got the more difficult potential matchup as the 93-win White Sox took out the 84-win Angels. And we will be facing off against the Pale Hose here in this American League Division Series that begins tomorrow. And although we certainly would be favored and deserve to be favored after a 108-win season, and as we noted, the best offense and the best pitching staff in the American League, we were only 500 against the White Sox this year. We split the 6 games we played against Chicago. They have an offense that's pretty good, ranked 3rd in the American League with 845 runs scored. Pitching staff that's more middle of the pack, ranked 6th overall, allowing 724 runs. Scored almost 100 more runs than the White Sox this year, and we allowed more than 100 fewer runs than the White Sox this year. So when all is said and done, certainly would have to think that the matchup overall favors us. We also do have home field advantage. The hope is to get these first 2 in Oakland and put a lot of pressure on the White Sox before we head to Chicago. On the mound here in Game 1 for the White Sox, Kutaiba Siraj, 26-year-old, was 14-8 with a 3.49 ERA this year. Much better season for him than his 2 previous seasons in Chicago. Former 6th-round pick from 2033 has become a good, solid, right-handed Major League starter with an outstanding curveball, throws in the high 90s. But you would have to think that the pitching matchup favors us. We have the 24-year-old Federico Arriola, made his first All-Star team this year, and took over as our number 1 starter following the injury to Jesus Saldana earlier this year. All Arriola did was lead the American League with 19 wins, lead the American League with a 2.41 ERA, and lead the American League with a 0.93 whip, as he put up an almost 6 WAR, and presumably is going to get some attention from the voters for the Cy Young Award. But right now, we're not worried about any of the postseason awards. We are worried about winning this game and hopefully this series as the 2041 postseason finally gets underway for our, at least on paper, mighty Oakland Athletics. Game number 1, unfortunately, does not go our way. A 3-1 victory for the White Sox. Arriola took the loss. Looks like Randy Jones in relief got the W for the White Sox. Taking a look at the box score, they jumped on us with a run in the 5th. We tied it up in the 6th on a single from Godina. Arriola pitched all the way into the 8th, but unfortunately he gave up a run-scoring single, or he actually didn't give up a run-scoring single, but the excellent young left-handed reliever Aguayo came in and gave up back-to-back singles, one of which was charged, the run associated with it, to Mr. Arriola. And he ended up picking up the loss. 2 runs, only 1 earned over those 7 1/3 innings, so an error by Pimentel also played into things. Aguayo, not great, a couple of hits and an earned run for him, in addition to the run for Arriola in the 2/3 of an inning that he pitched. And their starting pitcher, Siraj, was injured after he had been really good through 5 innings, just allowing 1 hit. Steve Tudor, former big-time starter, I believe. Yeah, still looks like he could be an excellent starter. Seems like Chicago must have a pretty good team if he's working out of the bullpen for him, which they obviously do. Couple times Cy Young Award winner as a starter, so couple of injuries to important pitchers, but the White Sox hold us to just 6 hits. Only Godina, who had the ribby with more than 1 hit. and it looks like all of our hits were singles. So a rough start to the postseason for our Oakland A's, and it's always great to avoid the best of 3 wild card series, but you still fall down 1-0 in a 5-game series, and you start feeling a little bit of pressure, particularly with a team that's got as lofty expectations as our Oakland A's do this year. Game number 2, the 27-year-old lefty Kevin Jacobs, 2-time All-Star, on the mound for the White Sox, 16-7 with a 3.33 ERA this year. Doesn't throw particularly hard, but he also doesn't walk a lot of batters, and he keeps the ball on the ground. We will have Doug Weiss on the mound, 10-2 this year with a 3.61 ERA. Had some injury issues a year after leading the American League with 21 wins, but is healthy now, and we need the former 4th-round pick out of Austin Peay to have a big game for us today to avoid falling behind 2-0. And we do get a big game from Weiss, a 6-0 victory, home run from the prospective Rookie of the Year, Jonah Richards, and we've at least knotted things back up at 1. Couple runs in the second, 2-run single by Godina, and then the big blow that put the game away, a 3-run shot by Richards in the bottom of the 8th to give us the 6-0 margin. Godina with a couple of hits for the second straight day, and Richards with 2, including the 3-run dinger. Weiss, 4 hits, no earned runs over 5 2/3 innings. And then Mendick and Rangel combined for 3 1/3 innings of scoreless relief, allowing just 1 hit, no walks while striking out 4. Jacobs was solid, 3 runs, only 1 earned over 7 innings. But fortunately for our Oakland Athletics, got the important win to knot things up at 1. And although we'd love to just win 2 in a row in Chicago to move on to the ALCS, the primary goal is to ensure we win at least one of these next 2 on the road to guarantee that worst case scenario is we'll have a Game 5 at home. We've got the one lefty in our rotation, Mike Blumenshine, on the mound today. Former 1st-round pick out of Brown, had perhaps his best major league season this year, although only pitched 139 1/3 innings pitched. Doesn't have the greatest stamina in the world. But he was still 15-3 with a 2.58 ERA and put up a 3 WAR for us this year. He'll be going up against Kevin Pilla, 32-year-old veteran, perennial Gold Glove winner and All-Star. He was 12-9 with a 4 ERA. Stuff is pretty average at this point, but still above average movement on his pitches and outstanding control for the durable 32-year-old. And the hope is certainly that we get the W here to put the pressure back onto the White Sox. Does not happen, unfortunately, though. A 7-6 win by the White Sox. And now the pressure is clearly on our 108-win Oakland A's, who are 1 loss away from a very early and surprising end to our season. Pilla with the W. Blumenshine took the loss. White Sox hit 4 home runs today. We had a couple. Richards with his second of the series, and Pimentel. Taking a look at the box score and how this game went. And the White Sox jumped out to a 6-0 lead on us. 4th inning, a solo homer by Jensen off of Blumenshine. And then Villarreal with a grand slam in that brutal 4th inning. Clawed back and made the deficit 6-3 before they scored an insurance run in the 8th. We came back with 3 in the top of the 9th to make it respectable. and put a little bit of pressure on the White Sox. But when all was said and done, Chicago got the victory here today. Blumenshine, a very rough outing for a guy who had such a good regular season. 8 hits, 2 walks, 6 earned runs over 3 2/3 innings. And he also allowed 3 of the 4 home runs that our pitching staff allowed today. Baumler did a nice job stabilizing things in relief, but too little, too late for our Oakland A's after falling down 6-0. And now the pressure is on. Won't exactly be like the record-setting regular season Seattle Mariners team getting bounced in the playoffs if we do happen to lose one of these next 2 games. But it'll still be a bitter disappointment after a brilliant regular season for our Oakland A's. Game 4 in Chicago. Eli Boyd, 33-year-old, split the year between Tampa and Chicago, was a combined 7-11, hit an ERA of almost 6 after he came over to the White Sox and was below replacement level. So it looks like Mr. Boyd was a trade deadline addition to the Chicago White Sox pitching staff. Below average stuff, average movement, but he does have very good control. And he'll be going against our trade deadline acquisition, Mike Gallick, who after being a pretty mediocre 6-8 in San Diego with an ERA of close to 5, was very good for us in Oakland, a 9-3 record with a 3.30 ERA over the final 12 games that he pitched this year. And we'll be counting on N4 to prevent us from a bitterly disappointing finish to this season here today in Chicago. And we do get a 4-3 victory, so did it the hard way. Looks like the game ended up in the hands of the bullpen. Rangel gets the win for us. Randy Jones takes the loss for the White Sox. Richards with his 3rd homer of the series, Pimentel with his 2nd, and the young center fielder Bobby Armstrong with his first postseason home run. Montalvo with a home run for the White Sox. And this was a classic game, went 14 innings. We jumped out to a 3-0 lead after 7. They came back with 3 in the bottom of the 8th, a 3-run home run from Montalvo. Looks like we had opportunities in the 10th and the 12th innings. And finally, Jonah Richards with a home run in the top of the 14th off of Randy Jones to give us the lead in extra innings. And then Rangel, who had already pitched 2/3 of an inning, closed things out for the save. Gallick did an outstanding job. 5 hits, 3 walks, 8 strikeouts, 1 run over 7 innings, threw over 100 pitches. Boyd was also good for Chicago. 3 runs over 7 innings. The game went into the bullpen. Aguayo blew the save for us. He allowed that big 3-run shot. But after that, only 3 more hits allowed by Oakland. Rangel with 3 strikeouts over the final inning and 2/3. Their catcher, Eric Jensen, day-to-day with a sore thumb. So it doesn't seem like that's going to be a huge impact for him. Doesn't look like he's actually their starting catcher either after hitting just a $176 in 74 at-bats this year. Well, it looks like he did actually start today, and he hurt himself early. And then Chris Mazzilli, who looked like he was much more their regular catcher this year, came on for him. So some interesting decision-making perhaps by the Chicago manager, but the important thing for our Oakland Athletics is that we've tied this series up 2-2. And we've made it home for game number 5, the decisive game in the series. Tigers are already waiting for the winners of this game. And it looks like the Giants and the Rockies are going to face off in the NLCS. The pattern of this series doesn't favor us. Chicago won the first, we won the second, Chicago won the third, our A's won the fourth. So if the win one, lose one trend continues, the season will end today for our Oakland A's. Kevin Jacobs, the 27-year-old, 16-7 with a 3.33 ERA. The lefty on the mound for the White Sox today. He's a good one, but we've got a good one also with Federico Arriola, possible AL Cy Young Award winner, who was our loser in game number 1, as our Oakland A's try to avoid a really disappointing early ouster from these playoffs. 10 games played between Oakland and Chicago this season, and it's 5-5. Whoever can get their 6th win of the year in this matchup will move on to the American League Championship Series. And unfortunately for our Oakland A's, the season is over. 11-6 loss for us. 3 home runs for the White Sox today. Uresti with the lone home run for us. Kevin Pilla, his 2nd win in relief in the series for the former excellent starter. Arriola, after a 19-7 regular season, goes 0-2 in the playoffs. Got to us early, 6 runs in the second. We did strike back with 3 in the third, but 2 more for Chicago in the fourth, added runs in the 5th, 7th, and 8th. And when it was all over, it was a relatively easy 11-6 victory for the Chicago White Sox. Villarreal, outstanding third baseman, is the series MVP. Mendoza, last year's ALCS and World Series MVP, most likely playing his final games in Oakland, hit just a .143 in this playoff series. Brutal outing for Arriola, but once again, errors doomed our team after having outstanding defense throughout the season. Chisin Iwata with what must have been a crippling error, because Arriola ended up allowing 6 hits and 1 walk over an inning and 2/3, so he certainly had a rough outing. But when there's 6 runs and there's only 1 of them that's earned, you know that there was definitely an opportunity to have gotten out of that inning with a lot less damage, and unfortunately it did not happen. And then the bullpen was not good today either. 4 pitchers, Baumler, Rangel, Carmichael, and Shearer, coming on in relief, and they all gave up at least 1 run. So after what was a brilliant regular season, and we talked about this in our last episode, this team was not just first in runs allowed, it was first in every pitching category, first in both defensive efficiency and zone rating, first in runs scored, first or second in every offensive category, second in steals, and 4th in base running. Team that had an incredible regular season and was outstanding at everything. And unfortunately, after a great regular season, we will have come up short in our quest to win back-to-back World Series And again, this team has done a lot of good things. Still have 3 of the last 6 World Series championships with these A's. But one thing we have been unable to execute on is winning the World Series. And we've had some of our most disappointing performances after we won the World Series. When we won that first year, we proceeded to drop down to 5th place and win just 71 games in 2030. Swept out of the playoffs in a wild card round in 2037 after winning our second title. Swept out of the playoffs 3-0 in a division series after winning the World Series in 2038. And this year, after we topped our 106-win season with a 108-54 record here in 2041, we at least won a couple of playoff games. But when all was said and done, if you win 2 playoff games in a 5-game series and the other team wins 3, you are the team that will be headed home. And unfortunately, that is what happened for our Oakland A's here in 2041. And I guess that means that I will be able to finish the playoffs this year because don't need to worry about paying a lot of attention to them since our Oakland A's season is over. And I guess the one positive thing we can say is that we did eke out a profit this year. You'll remember that our budget was cut last season after winning the World Series because we delivered a small loss. We're hoping that we'd ultimately deliver a profit this year while also winning the World Series, or at least going on a long playoff run. We did do the first of that, which Mr. Fisher will likely be pleased with given his penny-pinching tendencies. But unfortunately, in a season where we felt we were well set up to make a long playoff run, we are bounced out after the American League Division Series. So definitely some rough luck for the number 1 seeds in each league. Our A's bounced 3-2, and over in the National League, the Cardinals also bounced 3-2. So the Tigers and the Rockies, the second seeds in both leagues, now have a home field advantage in their respective playoffs after winning 4-game division series against the Phillies and the Blue Jays, respectively. And in this 2041 World Series, it'll be the Detroit Tigers, your AL Central winners, who were the second seed in the American League, going up against the 87-win San Francisco Giants, a wild card team that has taken it to the final game of each of their first 3 series, beat the Nationals in a deciding game number 3, took out the Cardinals in a deciding game number 5, and then took out the Rockies in the 7-game National League Championship Series 4-3. It was also a big-time ALCS with the Tigers winning in 7 against the White Sox. So should be an interesting World Series here, even though our White Sox, or our A's, are not a part of it. The White Sox who took out our A's are not a part of it either. And it was a magical run here in the postseason of 2041 for the San Francisco Giants. They had their easiest series of their 4 playoff series against the Tigers in the World Series, where the Giants took things 4-1. Very surprising to see what the Giants accomplished in the playoffs. They were an average offensive team, 7th in the National League in runs scored. A below-average pitching team, 10th in the National League with 770 runs against, despite outscoring their opponents by only 19 runs this year in the regular season. They did manage an 87-75 record, second place in the National League West, and they got into the playoffs, and they got hot at the right time. And the end result is that the Giants, our Cross Bay rivals, have supplanted our Oakland Athletics as world champions here in 2041. And so an outstanding regular season ends in playoff disappointment for our Oakland A's. We've made it to the start of the offseason. Development facilities open. The arbitration period has begun. Top prospect list. None of the top 10 prospects are members of the A's now that Jonah Richards is a proven major leaguer at this point. Looks like we're going to be losing pitching coach Dewan Kennedy from our ACL team. Some retirements, or one retirement of Ernesto Herrera in AA. Find out some big decisions going forward. Alejandro Landin, longtime infielder, started off as a second baseman for us, has become a shortstop for us more recently. Had some monster offensive years for us, but now on the other side of 30, coming off of the worst year of his career. Got a $5 million option on him for next year that we'll need to decide on. Review of the season goals. Wanted us to win it all. Disappointed that we didn't do it, but they agree we made a strong push. They're glad we brought on Chisa Iwata, who won a Gold Glove. Still need to improve in extra inning games. Happy with our performance in accomplishing goals. Very happy overall. For next season, need to win the championship, improve our record in extra inning games, build another dynasty. And he also wants us to sign Jorge Mendoza. That is certainly going to be challenging for us, as good as he is. Feel like we've got an outstanding replacement at catcher for him with the young Mr. Richards. And more importantly, Mr. Mendoza looking for 9 years at over $30 million a season, which, given our tough budgetary situation, is almost impossible to think of a way we can pull it off. Speaking of that budgetary situation, let's see what it's going to look like for next year. And after, I guess this was our 18th season here in Oakland, and we finally have gotten the budget up to $200 million. So I think that's a $6 million boost from where we were a year ago. Seems like Fisher rewards us more when we make him a little money than when we win a World Series championship, so we will need to keep that in mind. We are still going to be way down the pack, still ranked 28th in terms of our budget, but and you can see theoretically we have a little bit of payroll flexibility for next year, but that only would be if we cut our scouting budget to below baseline and our player development budget to just a bit above baseline. So as usual, we are likely to need to figure out a way to carve some payroll out of this budget before we get to free agency. So we're going to have some interesting decisions to make in the upcoming episodes before we start getting deep into those decisions. However, we'll do our annual roster review to start talking about who we might keep, who we might move on from, who we might try to trade away, who we might try to extend. And we'll also check in on our highly regarded farm system and some of our former players around the league. So after the best regular season in our 18 years here in Oakland, we will be heading into next year, as we talked about, with the largest budget that we've ever had, even though it's still only higher than two teams in baseball. And I guess the goal for next year is, over the last 6 seasons, we've won the World Series every time it's been an even-numbered year. So the hope is we can keep that streak going in 2042 and give ourselves 4 titles in the last 7 years. So a disappointing playoffs for the Oakland A's here in 2041. But now we are on to 2042. And we'll start talking about our plans for the offseason when we do our roster review in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.